Well, never know quite what to do, which song, but I've heard the word obligation today. That we act. I will. Thank you. Yeah. Tap my little mic here. Okay then. Yeah, I was asked to write a song for a fellow who was doing a workshop exactly on what we're talking about these days on, and he had some indigenous teachers, and he said, you people don't, his teachers say, you gotta bring the word obligation in. It isn't, it's sort of a bad word in our culture. Everybody wants to be free and clear and all that. He said, and somebody I heard saying, I think it was one of the elders, we're born with an obligation to deliver our gift, that we all need each other. That's what real community is when you know that you need each other and you're not going to make it without each other, and each other includes all your relations. Includes the trees, and the water's alive, and the mountains are alive, and everything is part of you're related to all of it, and everything depends on everything else. In other words, everything lives in obligation to everything that lives, and since everything is alive, it's one great family of mutual flourishing. And even though the word obligation kind of has a jolt to us, I love the phrase much obliged. How does that feel when somebody says much obliged? It's like, oh yeah, and I'm much obliged to you. And we know that there's these threads of connection, and we're going to have each other's backs, and we're going to need to hold each other well through these coming days and years. And so it's good to start feeling this. So here's how this song goes. It goes, everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. So everybody sing, everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. Next time we're going to go everything that lives. Everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. All together now. Everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. Everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. So the next part goes, everything in all creation. Everything in all creation. Everything is alive. Everything is alive. So I'm going to sing all of it, and then you can sing it back. Everything in all creation. Everything is alive. Everything in all creation. Everything is alive. Even though somebody jumped the gun over there, it's all right. This time it won't happen. Okay, so you guys are going to be, you're going to be, everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. Everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. Keep that going. there's another, there's a harmony, and usually there's a bunch of basses that everything in all creation is alive. But if anybody wants to do that, but here we go. So you have to stand up and sing to each other so you really hear each other. Here we go. Everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. Everything lives in obligation to everything that lives. Okay, over here we go. Everything in all creation, everything is alive.
People out there know about the event called Singing Alive. Raise your hand. So, quite a few of you. Singing Alive is a gathering I started many years ago with Morgan Brent, and it's held in Washington and Oregon. And the purpose was because we came to these conferences and we wanted to just sing like that. And so we invented a conference that wasn't a conference, it was only the Singing Alive. And so we just, all we do is get together and sing for 4 or 5 days straight, and it's just glorious. Talk about getting some work done. Wow. But at this conference, we're really focused a lot on the work aspect of how our mission of global earth repair. So we're going to have a panel shortly on that, but here's Lacey, who's really, and I said, wow, she's actually, I thought, maybe she's like my understudy, and I said, no, actually, maybe she's my, she's the next generation that's moving up to take this on.
That was a nice introduction. I just have a few housekeeping things to say. So nothing too exciting just yet, but how's everybody doing? Good. Yeah. I feel really honored to be a part of making this all happen with a really wonderful and large team. And without this team, it's just been so great to have such a large group of people bringing all of them together. So thank you for being a part of that and being here. A little louder. Okay. So since there's a lot of people in the room, I just wanted to make 3 quick announcements. There are changes being made to the large schedule board, and just to remind you to please check it frequently. If there are changes made to a workshop, it will be highlighted in orange, so that'll get your attention when you look at the board. If you are looking to purchase delicious meals at the Commons, they're still available, and you can get them purchased at the registration table. And the last announcement I wanted to make was specifically for the presenters. If you have a PowerPoint presentation that you're giving, please bring your laptop to the room. We are very low on laptops. If you don't have one or are not able to bring it, please borrow one. There's probably many other presenters who have their laptops here. So we're really limited, so it's really important if you have a PowerPoint to please bring that with you. And if any of the presenters have any changes that they need to make to the schedule of their class, There is a bright, beautiful orange piece of paper with the phone number for Aline, and she will navigate that for you, and we will get those changes made. Thank you everyone for being here. It's really exciting, and this panel is going to be really great.
Will the changes be on the website?
The changes are not going to be on the website. They will be here on the board, and just bringing presents here. The board is here for that. So, yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
So we'll get started with the panel here. Now, is this working? Loud enough? Okay. I can't really tell from up here. So next we have John DeLu and Dr. Thomas J. Garreau joining us. And just, if they would, yes, come up here and I wonder, I haven't had, try to give the shortest introduction possible so that we just have the time with them. But when I came up with this idea of the conference, John DeLu is the first person I thought of. You're a hero of mine. And next time I said, oh, where's the heroines? I better get them up here next. But we do have, yeah, but here's two of our real heroes, and so I'm just pleased that John could make it. He said he was planning on coming once we got it together. Actually, we waited, I told that story already, but I was waiting until John had his first ecosystem restoration camps up and running to put this on so that he could really show people here and tell people about it, because the world needs just a lot of earth repair and ecosystem restoration camps. And at one point somebody recommended the book Geotherapy to me, and I said, wow, it's a $70 book, and I usually don't buy too many $70 books, but I said, this is really recommended. So I got the book, and I hadn't read very far into it at all, and I said, we must have Thomas here at the conference, and because the book is the best exposition I've seen on actually how to get ourselves out of this mess from the real scientific viewpoint, and you know, Thomas being a scientist really, because some people criticize our citizen scientists and our grassroots movements like, oh, they're not really science, they're all about heart and love. I said, oh yeah, that's us. But so it's really nice to have people like Dr. Thomas and Dr. Don Huber today with us. And so when I read this quote from the book, what is needed is a real grassroots, bottom-up, locally managed restoration, mass underground movement of informed people, a groundswell of popular opinion driven by a green ethos to regreen our planet and recarbonize our soil. And I'm like, yeah, salute to that. And I've been trying to write a sentence that encapsulated what this conference was intended to be, and when I read this sentence, I said, really, I could not say it better. I couldn't come up with anything better. So we put it on our poster, and so I'm just thrilled that Tom decided that he could join us also. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them to show us some way.
Do you want to stay here or do you want to watch them? Oh, you were yeah, I'm going to run this.
But, yeah.
You want to stay there? Well, yeah, I can come. Testing 1, 2. This is a test. Okay. Rahindra has arrived. That's okay, we're fine. So, you know, as if you went to the dinner, you know I have to overcome my basic shyness in order to speak to you. Okay, so I have a short thing, and I'll try to explain what I hope will happen. I will tell you a little bit about my work because I have a suspicion that some of you know a little bit about me already. Is that a little bit? Okay. So let me see. That's working. Good. So I'm so grateful that we're here together, that I could come and that you could be here, and that Skeeter and all the organizers, and Thomas I met in, I think, Peru the first time. And I'm also grateful to the Common Land Foundation, who supports my work, and they're doing large-scale ecosystem restoration. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about the long personal journey that has brought me here. So my father is Chinese, and my mother is American of Scottish descent. So you can imagine a very typical growing up with Buddhism and Taoism and, you know, fundamental Christianity. And then my wife is German. So Cosima is a lovely person and wonderful. And so that mixes us up even more. And then we have 4 children. They're very naughty. We gave birth to 3 and we adopted 1. 3 wasn't enough. We built a house in China 30 years ago now. And it's a very nice house, and it's been wonderful to live in China, strangely. And we all grew old. And my father passed away in December last year. My mother will have her 100th birthday in June. And my sister is coming from Kansas to China for the birthday party. And then my mother is going to fly back to America to visit her older sister. So when I was 26 years old, I had the opportunity to go to China. And I had also the opportunity to help open the CBS News Bureau at the time of normalization of relations between China and the United States. And I worked in journalism for about, more than 15 years before I covered some really big stories like the rise of China from poverty and isolation. That was dramatic. I have lived there 40 years now, so I've watched it transition a lot from a backwater, kind of communist backwater, to a major power internationally. And so it's a very different place than when I first went, but my life is pretty much the same in my little house that I built, that our family built. So I covered these major geopolitical stories for a long time, and it was a very confusing and busy and hectic life. But in 1995, the World Bank asked me to go to the Loess Plateau, in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River, to film a baseline study for a restoration project. And when I went there, I found that I had to compare what I was seeing in the Loess Plateau and in ecology with the geopolitical events that I had been covering, and there was no comparison. The ecological systems seemed to me to be vastly more important than the political discussions that were going on. I like to say that most of the leaders that I saw were legends in their own mind. But they didn't seem to have the ability to lead us out of the problems that we had. So that was disappointing for a young person to find out, but it was interesting. Loess is the geomorphological name of this soil type, which is a wind-borne sediment. Oh, I've come back. That's nice. So nothing is perfect, as you can see. This is what it looked like when I got to the Loess Plateau. So in 1995, the cradle of Chinese civilization, where the largest ethnic group comes from on the planet, looked like the moon. And this made me consider, what am I seeing here? How is this possible? And after some time, I realized that I was looking through time, that we're not the first generation to live, and that the generations in the past did not know some of the things that we know. And we're not acting like we know some of the things that we know. So I began to consider, first I was thinking about human history, but then I realized that I was also thinking about evolutionary time. And then I realized I was also thinking about geologic time. And then I started to consider cosmic time. And so the things that have occurred to me as I was witnessing what I was seeing began to inform my worldview. And I realized that the worldview that we're taught, the way history is being taught to us, it's as if when you have a culture which conquers another culture and sort of dominates or commits genocide or enslaves another culture or race, that they win. And it came to me that actually, and this is probably a Chinese thing, because the Chinese, when they encountered the Europeans, they called them the barbarians. And they called them the barbarians because they were all about physical force, that might makes right. The Chinese came up with gunpowder, and they decided they couldn't use it for warfare because it would be unchivalrous and unfair. So in the beginning, I realized that the earth was actually a molten rock. And it was surrounded by gases that we can't breathe. So I could call them poisonous gases, but they're just gases that we can't breathe. And then life began. And over prodigious time, the respiration of all living things created the atmosphere. And it constantly filtered and continuously renewed this. And the process is a biochemical photoreactive process. And this is over enormous time, and it's multiple species of life that are interacting, and each generation of life dies and gives up its body. And in doing this, changed the geologic materials into a living soil. And we are walking on the bodies of all the living things, and our DNA carries the map of all living things. And the atmosphere, the hydrological cycle was created in this way because there weren't fresh waters before. And the powers, the ability for multiple generations to self-organize, to create a system which makes the earth as it is remarkable. And beneath this canopy, human beings emerged. That was where we emerged. And when we emerged in paradise with an oxygenated atmosphere and freshwater, fertile soils, and amazing biodiversity. And then, well, this is a cheetah in the wild nursing. I just put it in. It's like a YouTube video of cats, you know, so that you'll like me. But what we see in evolutionary time and the outcome is that human beings emerge in paradise. And that's the same thing that it says in our religious texts. And I'm going to just stop this for a moment. Well, no, I'll let it go. You know, this amazing beauty, amazing symbiosis between all the different forms of life, the systems, multi-dimensional symbiotic systems. And into this, we have nothing to do with this. We emerge and benefit from it. But when we emerged, we were rather clever. And if you study primate behavior, and then you look at human behavior, you can see that we have some pre-human behavior. And well, this is somebody told me it's exciting, and I said, exciting is when you fly in a helicopter with the door off. This is I highly recommend it. By the way, but we need to process and understand that we're the latest iteration, and we have inherited some traits, and we have a karmic debt, and we need to deal with this. So we have now got a lot of issues. We have systemic dysfunction on a planetary scale. So we don't have carbon disequilibrium in the atmosphere as the only problem, and it doesn't make any sense to discuss this as a singularity. It's an indicator. Carbon disequilibrium in the atmosphere is an indicator of systemic dysfunction on a planetary scale. So we have a huge task before us. And one of the things that I've noticed that has become a thing is climate anxiety. And I hadn't really been considering this much because I've been focused on trying to understand the various systems. I was naive when I began to study this, so I didn't realize that I was going to have to study everything, you know. So I wasn't afraid of it because I didn't realize what I had to do. But it turns out if you spend decades studying something, you kind of know what it is. And what we find is that in all of the functional systems, there are certain principles at play. And these principles are essentially biodiversity, biomass, and necromass, or accumulated organic material. The reason I say necromass is to try to popularize this word, which is directly analogous to biomass. So most of the other things that people leaf litter or soil organic matter or this kind of stuff. It's rather different. But necromass, since all living material dies and gives up its body, the necromass is a directly analogous term. And what we see in evolution is climax equilibrium. And then, after human history, we have something else. We start to see a different trajectory. So I've had the opportunity over the last 30 years to have a number of fellowships from different organizations, and I've been able to go to 90 countries around the world. And in every case, in functional ecosystems, they were massively biodiverse, they were, had huge organic layers, and they infiltrated and retained all available moisture. So these are the criteria for functional ecosystems. And I also came to some conclusions, and I hope I haven't hurt the feelings of some people in talking about this, but our economic understanding is not very well developed. We have represented in our economic thinking the mistakes which humanity has made over long periods of time. And essentially, what I think this means is we have valued things. So we have an economy of things. And so we've said that things are more valuable than life. And this is simply untrue. So when we value life, we get a completely different result. And so just as when we realize that human beings emerged in paradise through evolution, so the scientific interpretation is exactly the same as the historical religious texts. We have to realize that the second part of that cosmology is that human beings sinned and were cast out of the garden. So we need to think about that second part too. So exactly what happened, the snake and the apple thing I'm not too clear on. But if that's a poetic metaphor and not that's another cat video. If it's a poetic metaphor and not a dogma, then I think I know what original sin is. So at some point in human history, we became hunters. We stopped being, we became very good at hunters. Before that, we were prey. So we were small mammals and we were endangered. But then our biggest impact was when we began agriculture. So we actually, back when we were hunters, we altered the predator-prey relationships because we wiped out megafauna. When we became social hunters like wolves or like lions or other social hunters, we were so good at it that we took out giant megafauna in every continent. So like mastodons and this kind of thing, they're just, were eliminated. I don't think eating old mastodon, when you killed a mastodon, you know, that you'd have to, the whole village would have to eat the thing forever. It would be really terrible after a while. You know, mastodon again, can you imagine? But it was this point, and this is very interesting because Neolithic agriculture is the reverse of the evolutionary process. So it's always less biodiversity, always less biomass, and always less necromass. And so it ends up with collapsing the systems that created the atmosphere that constantly filtered and continuously renewed all of the systems, the atmosphere, the hydrological cycle, the soil fertility, and of course, the wonderfully diverse landscape. And what's interesting about this is that every civilization that followed this trajectory ended up collapsing their ecology, and then that culture failed. So this is a trend. And what it seems like is if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're destined to repeat them. And so this has been repeated numerous times, and it comes to us and our generation, and if we fail at this, then we pass this on to the next generation. So now we come to the interesting part, which is that over the last 30 years, I've been documenting the fact that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale degraded landscapes, including landscapes that had been massively degraded over vast areas of historical time. So I would call this the great work of our time. This is what we're called to do. This is what we have to understand. We need to act as a species on a planetary scale and realize that our individual interests are all the same. This is what happened in China. This is September 1995, and the next picture will transition to September 2009. So that's 14 years. This is what happened, and we made a film called Hope in a Changing Climate that was broadcast on the BBC one day before the Copenhagen COP15. So this sort of states the moment when there was a kind of a realization internationally about what is possible. The area of the restoration in China, the pilot area, was 35,000 square kilometers. That's approximately the size of Belgium. So if you can do this, and this is, I have more, and we'll have some other workshops that will talk about the extreme and the edges of where we are. But I will tell you now that it's possible to restore, to rehydrate dehydrated biomes. It's possible to grow soils. All of you gardeners know this. But we have to do this at extraordinary scale. And the only way that we can do this is together. And we have to realize that there is this karmic debt that is in many parts of the world. It's here. We are here. And it's in Africa. And it's in many parts of the world. But it's everywhere. It's always the same. And it's not about blame and retribution. It's about truth and reconciliation. Because we need to go to the next stage in human history. And if we carry this baggage from place to place, we can't do it. Now, if you look at the top of this graph, at the time of settled agriculture, it was a pretty much pristine system, although they'd taken out the megafauna, so they lost the mastodon. But the interesting thing is, when the Chinese decided to make an intervention, they made an intervention which completely changed the development trajectory. The point where they did that is the paradigm shift that determines whether human beings survive or whether we collapse our systems. And if you play that scenario out for a few hundred years, you're back to climax equilibrium. So this, I think, is the thing that we need to process and understand. Now, many things have happened to me since we started to do this. The science agrees with this. So I was a dropout camera guy. You know, why should I know anything? So I thought that they're going to cut me off at the knees here. But instead, this is now pretty much understood and not disagreed. They, instead of telling me I'm wrong, they keep giving me more fellowships. So what's also interesting about this is that it's in policy now. So all of the UN policies, the United Nations is going to have a decade of restoration. We need an army of people who can restore. We need everyone to believe and understand what we need to do and to work together. And tomorrow I'll talk about ecosystem restoration camps. I'll answer some questions if you need that today. But tomorrow I'll explain how the ecosystem restoration camps are coming together around the world and what it means to do this and how everyone has a role to play. So we have a methodology now, which can, before I thought of that, I couldn't figure out how we were going to do it because we have to do it really fast. But when I thought about this and I realized we actually need to take responsibility. We can't allow the existing institutions are dedicated to maintaining the status quo. So the idea that they're going to transform is kind of difficult. So I believe now Thomas is going to tell you a lot of interesting things because he's very brilliant. So come up and tell him some brilliant things. And and when he's finished, we'll answer questions and have a discussion.
I can't keep up with him. As John has said, really, regenerating our planet's life support systems is the task that lies ahead of us for the next 100 years. Sorry? Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry about that. Okay. What I was... paraphrase John, really, the task of regenerating our planet's life support systems is going to be the task that is going to be for all of humanity for the next centuries, maybe 1,000 years, because we have a lot of damage to undo. And as John says, it can't be done unless everybody does it. It's a pity that so few people understand it. Now, it's a pleasure to be here among people who do grasp that. I mean, it's nice, you know, we all together, the unity, all that. And you know, everyone senses that. We're part of nature, we're connected. Nature is us. It's not something separate from us. And it's our own life support system we're talking about. Therefore, we'll be better off if we manage it properly. But what I want to get at is why is it that we're such a small minority when we need to be the overwhelming majority to be able to get this task done? And the fact is that the vast majority of people out here don't get that. They think they're separate from nature. Nature is something that God gave them to plunder as quickly as they can and make as much money from as quickly as they can. And almost every religion actually sort of says that, you know, that the earth was given to us to use and you know, not to cherish and manage and make better. Indigenous religions, many of them say that, not all, but many or most do. And we've kind of lost that trend of living in nature. We've lost it almost completely in many places. And so really we have to face it, we're a minority, those of us who get that. Now, how do we turn that around? I don't know. I mean, I think the problem is that our educational system is so dysfunctional that in every country, what children are taught is to worship the political and religious ideologies that control them. They're taught to be good citizens. They're told to follow orders and don't question and yes, sir, and parrot whatever propaganda is stuffed into their ears. Okay? Our whole education system is designed to make us obedient servants, not to make us think for ourselves. And that's true everywhere in the world. I don't know of any country that has a progressive education system that's based on teaching people to think for themselves. I think what we need is an education system based on nature itself. And that we don't have. We have an educational system that's based on human and political institutions that we're taught to worship. You know, we worship presidents and constitutions and all that. We're not taught to worship nature. Okay? And I think that's a flaw. And I mean, I think that our educational system everywhere is dysfunctional. We need to begin at the very beginning. I think kids get this stuff intuitively, but they're just it's beaten out of them. And it seems to me that a rational educational system begins with a child, no matter where they grow up, understanding the history, the ecology of what they see around them, how they came to be there, how they evolved, how to nurture them, how to make them better and grow better, and to be a more effective system. I mean, to give an example, you know, a small child doesn't believe in the existence of bacteria. You can't see them. You know, we only can recognize what we can see. But children need to know about bacteria at the very youngest age because they need to know why they should wash their hands after they go to the bathroom. Because there are these little things there that you can't see that can make you sick. Most of the little things you can't see are actually good for you. The bad ones are a small minority, but the point is they're very real. And our educational system should teach children right away about bacteria, all these living things that are small that we can't see, that are all around us that we depend on. But that's only one example. The same thing is true of the plants, the rocks, the soil, everything around us. And my own belief is that, that's the wrong term, but my own view is that the educational system should start with training us about our own environment and everything about it, and then proceed to learn about our political institutions. I don't know of a place that would allow that to happen, though, except for, so we say small counterculture groups that do homeschooling. But somehow we have to transform the educational system to make people understand this, because I think it's intuitive, but it's beaten out of us at a young age, unfortunately. And that's my plea, is to have an educational system that trains people from the youngest age to appreciate the importance of nurturing all the living things around them and not just cutting them down as quick as they can.
And that's yours. You got to put it on.
I'll stop there.
Skeeter, you want to come up and join us? Yeah. You know, I would add a couple of things. That the Germans have something that is very interesting. It's called the forest kindergarten. Is anybody aware of this? The forest kindergarten kids don't go inside. They're outside. The investment is in clothing and equipment. They have rain gear, they have snow gear, and they're very healthy. And they understand they don't need toys, they don't need plastic stuff. They look at, things, rocks and sticks and acorns and yeah, and it's wonderful. It's a great thing. I also think maybe Finland isn't doing too bad. We need to, and I also there is one thing that I think we have to do. We have to stop being negative. We need to kind of make a rule. Like, we're not going to say anything negative. We're just going to talk about the good stuff. And if we need to teach people, but the system doesn't do it, let's create another system. I don't really think it's very good to protest the existing system, because I don't think it's going to do anything. I think we just build another system. And in building that other system, we're doing what we need to do. So for us to make our landscapes and our families and our communities as resilient as possible to inevitable outcomes now. We're past certain thresholds. So we're seeing increased intensity and increased examples of very serious weather events. That's going to increase. So in order to be resilient, you need maximum biodiversity, maximum biomass, and maximum necromass. So we can do that if we choose to work together and do that. And I don't want to dominate the conversation, but let me just say that we've figured out a way to do this using ecosystem restoration camps. And if we can build these camps and people go to these camps and learn all the techniques for water harvesting, soil creation, inoculation, microbial, fungal inoculation, propagation and plant out of indigenous, mainly indigenous and endemic plants, and also to discuss taxonomy and maybe stop totally vilifying what we're calling invasive plants. And realize that they're pioneer plants, and that if we take away all the things that are trying to restore the soils, that's not actually helping the climax come sooner. But all of that can be discussed and learned together in ecosystem restoration camps. That's the place where we can practice. And we can practice by doing. So we don't need to discuss it in, let's talk it to death. It won't happen on the internet. It's a physical restoration of natural earth systems. Well, Skeeter, talk to me.
Okay. Well, while you were talking there, I had the thought that, as we all realize that we're living in an insane system, that it's like the insane asylum is actually ruling the world somehow. And decent, respectable people that actually have a clue are sort of scoffed at and laughed at in the commercial media. Well, of course, more and more you might say, more and more people applaud us and say, oh yes, earth repair would be a good thing. Taking care of our ecosystems, maybe it's a good time to start. So we're at a rising wave, and it's sort of a race to the finish line here in a way. I actually think that the insane system that we're dealing with in the military is a very strong contingent to that, and the forces that be, that we are faced with doing earth repair at the same time as we're sort of doing a rear guard action with the cavalry trying to shoot us, in a sense. It's there are the forces of destruction out there, and even though I have devoted my life to building a better world, I'm really hoping that some generation will, take the suckers out somehow. And get us to where, it's a rule of law again instead of insanity. So I've been waiting and hoping for that for a long time. But in the meantime, trying to build that better world consistently at the same time. But we have to do it we can't ignore that we're in the framework of this time. And one of my largest hopes has been for years was that the civilization would crumble sooner than later. I think I share that with Derek Jensen in the sense of it was the better to get it over with now before the losses are higher. But so who knows what's going to happen, but in whatever happens, earth repair is better go forward. And we have some great examples around the world, and I just pulled out a book on South Korea reforestation. I really highly recommend it. Everybody look at how that tiny nation, it's substantially sized, but the country of South Korea largely reforested itself and with a 9-year plan, and John was mentioning there the 14-year plan. And we can come up with example after example all around the world where we have successfully done ecosystem restoration, just drastic changes. And even 1 year you can see change, 2, 3, 4 years. It's really amazing how rapid earth repair can go. There is the long-term, some of these Middle Eastern countries might take that 1,000 years to kind of get your biome back totally, but, or if that, but anyway, I just like to say it's just so possible, and I'm just, how do we do it in the face of and during the same times as we, anyway, there are a few thoughts.
I want to comment a bit, you know, what John said, sorry, a little louder. The idea of immersing children in nature, I mean, so they understand biology, the soil, the physics, how the air moves, where the water comes from, and all of that, it seems to be the most important thing they could learn. But in fact, not just that what we're being taught is different. In fact, a lot of young people, I'm afraid to say, are turning away from nature because they're sitting there with the screen this big and they don't look at anything else. They're totally embedded in an artificial world that has very little, if anything, to do with the real world.
I think we just broke the rule, though, didn't we?
Okay, now John doesn't want me to say negative stuff, but I mean, that is a reality we have to deal with, is that people, unfortunately, many young people are becoming more divorced from the world around them than they were before, because they're in a world of electrons.
Let me speak to that. So, actually, what I've found is that ecology and earth sciences are infinitely fascinating. And so what we need to do is stop them from playing games. And if they want to play games, play the taxonomy game or play the microbial game and begin to understand these things. But we're going to have to, so I think there's actually, all generations now have things that need to happen. Young people have a role.
Oh, it's a crucial role. I'm just worrying how we get children away from just staring at these 2 inches of glass and the cartoon figures they
Give
see
them
and looking at
something
the world
else to
behind
do.
them.
Civilization collapse will take care of that.
Yes. So who can handle a microphone for the questioners? You'll have to come to get a mic. Who's in charge?
Well, we have an extra mic right here, and I don't think we could take it beyond that thing. Michael will come out and direct. How do we get?
And it's just a comment, in that I mean I have 5 younger siblings, so I know what it's like for the younger generations, and it's a change in communication style that's happening. So people don't talk to each other anymore. They talk in their cell phones, even when they're sitting right next to each other. That actually happens. And so I think it's more than just playing games and getting them not to look at their phone. It's bringing that human connection again. But anyway, sorry.
I would also mention that it's very different in different parts of the world. That we should not just be talking about one country. We should be realizing that in the places we call the third world, the people are happier than the people who are immersed in huge materialism. Yeah, they're on their phones.
So while we're all here together, and as we're thinking strategically about how to implement the vision you've so beautifully elucidated for us, can we talk about how to bring billions of dollars to pay for the labor that it will take to enact the restoration that's required of us? And if there is this Green New Deal, and if we've done another New Deal before, and if we know that young farmers in rural places all need second jobs in order to exist and survive, even in their meager attempts at punk subsistence, can't we understand that a remunerative side job in earth repair would be a very compelling life world for the young people who are here in attendance? And we better not waste too much time before we start talking about how to attach an economy to that work.
Hear, hear. And we have Severin here from the Greenhorns, who really helps carry a lot of that information. So thank you, Severin. And we want to have a panel that actually looks at the the relationship between ecosystem restoration camps, what I'm calling ecosystem restoration communities, where people actually get to live and, in a sense, steward the land over long periods of time. They actually become, in a sense, caretakers with title to the land. I would like to see some pretty large-scale land reform in the world, which gets people onto those lands. And the economy works out really well. There's no doubt in the economy, a good economist would come up with that. These ecosystem restoration things like in the Lost Plateau actually yield really good money. I mean, that's a great investment.
Yeah, but I think there's a bigger discussion. So, Severin, the discussion is larger. So, in the same way that I doubt we can expect the existing institutions to not protect the status quo, since that's what they were created to do, I think it's unlikely that the existing materialistic economy is going to somehow change its spots and embrace restoration. And I think that the problem with the economy is not what most people think, because most people believe they know what money is. And somehow that's okay, everything's okay if we just would transfer the money from this to that. But actually, the money is now false. Unfortunately, the situation is very grim because, what? Oh, sorry, okay, well, understanding, consciousness and understanding is a good thing, so it's very good that we're beginning to recognize that it's very good that we're beginning to recognize that, like, an abstract system of numbers without any real basis is what we now have as a monetary system. And what is a monetary system? It's a storehouse of value. It's a means of exchange, and it's a trust mechanism. And it's an abstraction created by human beings, assigning value to numbers, and then giving those numbers to somebody. So what we need to do is we need to understand that collectively as a species and realize that money is anything we say it is. And we have to say that ecological function is vastly more valuable than anything that human beings have ever made and everything that human beings will ever make. And if we do that, the livelihoods from ecological restoration are going to be the best ones in the world. And there is going to be no incentive for overconsumption or over-exploitation. And you won't even have to make things or buy and sell things in order to create value and to get money. So I think the answer to your question is very complex. It's not in the just minor tweaking of tax or distribution of existing monetary policies or something. So
I'll just add that localization is so important, and that there's going to be a number of economic panels and workshops which will address this to more in depth.
I just wanted to express I'm delighted that you mentioned the need for truth and reconciliation. I can't overstate how important I think that is. I've been involved tangentially with something called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is a national and international effort for accountability for the assassinations of the 1960s. And it has members of the Martin Luther King and Kennedy families as part of this. But I think we also need it for ecological overshoot, and to recognize we've all played a part in leading to it, and we all have a part to play in converting it. And just leave with a challenge. Can we convert the Trident base down the road with hydrogen bombs for oceanic repair? And it's not about fiat currency, it's about giving those people something better to do with their days.
Well, I would also thank you for that, and I would just like to mention that today Polly Higgins is her funeral is today, and Polly had championed ecocide as something. Now, she and I had a minor disagreement because I think that if we use law and penalties to stop people from doing things, it's not the same as consciousness. It's that they're afraid of the penalties. But in the absence of consciousness, I think that ecocide is a very real thing, and that, you know, if that's the only thing that they will listen to at the moment, then maybe that's not a bad thing. But so truth and reconciliation, I think, is critical. Yeah.
I heard earlier talking about the kids with their little screens. Where the hell did they get them? They weren't born with them. So there's all of you in here that have either given your kids those devices, or you will have kids and you will be forced or pressured into getting those devices. So I don't want us to be talking about the children doing these devices when they're handed to them. So it's our responsibility as adults, not the children's.
Ooh, I'm up.
They're
So
crawling down the aisle. It's really
Oh, wow.
tremendous thing.
I just want to acknowledge that, yes, most of us, just to add to what Jim just said, most of us do use these, and we find them useful in our lives for whatever reason we're doing it. We're participating in it. It's a reality. I definitely thank you for the vision that you put forward. And I guess to summarize what I heard is a dedicated army of people going out on their own and doing the work that needs to be done, which is beautiful. I feel it's being done largely in communities like Port Townsend. But another reality is where we're at in the state of the environmental destruction, what's the carbon that's baked into our system that's going to rise temperatures, rise sea levels, communities, millions, the majority of populations next to seas are going to be displaced. That's going to have huge impacts. So my take is, while it's beautiful, and I'm glad that everybody is doing their own part in their own way, I don't think it's going to change at the pace that science is demanding without us doing large-scale transformations. In my vision, or in my view of things, that involves government. And so right now there's the proposal of the Green New Deal, which fits largely into a lot of what you've said, but it's trying to restructure our economy and sections of our government too, to address the very real threat that we have been living and stewing in and are just increasing by kicking it down the road. So yeah, it's part of it. Yeah.
If I could say something to that, I think that if we wait for the government, that it would be a big mistake. But if the government decides it's going to do this, I think we should say, great, do it. Wonderful.
But to think that us on our own, I think, is doing it on our own while these institutions are not going to go away if we just wish them to go away, they're not. They're here, just like cell phones are here. Just
Well,
like
let me say something else to that then. The biggest power are the people. And the government is supposed to be serving the people. So, you know, I wouldn't wait for the government. I would tell the government, this is what we choose.
Let me add a little to that. I mean, the fact is that almost all governments around the world are getting their money from the people who are plundering our planet. You know, that's the fact. I mean, I don't know of a country where that's not true, but the interesting thing is we're beginning to see people realizing that they should be running for office based on progressive and regenerative ideas. They're just beginning. I mean, they're very incipient. But I'll tell you one example of that I was involved in about a year or two ago, and that is that the Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations, that's 53 countries with a quarter of the population of the world. Okay, it's a huge number of people. The Secretary General of the Commonwealth, it's actually all the English-speaking countries in the world except for the United States in the Commonwealth. Okay, the Secretary General is a woman from the Caribbean, from the island of Dominica, Lady Patricia Scotland. And she decided to pursue a strategy at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, regenerative development to reverse climate change. It had all the right words. It was absolutely right. And she held a bunch of meetings that I was involved in. I think John was too. And you know what happened? It all fizzled out. And what it seems to have happened, no one ever said why nothing happened, but it did look as though the governments told her she was acting above her station, and that wasn't what she was supposed to do. And the whole thing just disappeared. But the fact that it was proposed at all does indicate that there are some smart politicians out there who understand where the future is coming from.
But the end result was that they didn't do any restoration, that they had a bunch of meetings.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we need, at this point, it's been, for me, 3 decades, and the only thing that I like doing now is seeing real changes. And, you know, we have a foundation, it's a private foundation, private funding and so on. It has, just this one foundation has 2 million hectares under restoration. And it's supporting farmers in farmer cooperatives. It's working with farmer cooperatives to create value chains and regenerative practices and trainings and all of this. So, I mean, every one of these things that we think of, we better try. But the real issue that I see now is that there are billions of people at the edges of large degraded ecosystems where for thousands of years humans have been abusing these systems and they're broken. And we're going to have to go to the worst places. So I mean, we're here in this is late stage paradise as far as I'm concerned. You know, and you know, I was in Mauritania recently. I'm talking with Somalia, we're working in Egypt. You know, this is crazy bad. But even there, we can increase infiltration and retention of moisture. We can restore total vegetative cover. We can protect and encourage the natural succession of biodiversity. So we need to work there, and we need to work with these people. So when I talk about the people, I'm talking about the people on Earth, not Americans.
Mm-hmm. And I just, maybe one follow-up comment. I just, when you listed that list of things there, the water retention, the landscapes, and building the biomass, and I said, I'm trained in permaculture. I've been in permaculture since '81, and there's just no doubt in my mind that we can go to just about some of the worst things on the planet and fix and get them fixed up and start the water retention going. So I'm just one of thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people trained in how to do this. So it's just, there is a cadre of people, and that's just one group of many, the permaculture circuit. But so it just is possible.
Skeeter, can I say something to this? I think there's one thing, I didn't know anything about permaculture, I have to tell you this. until I met Jeff Loughton. So I was studying function and dysfunction in terrestrial ecosystems and large-scale ecosystem restoration for like a really long time before I really understood anything about permaculture. And what I noticed was there's a difference between function and productivity. A lot of people are talking about, like, how can I grow more food, or I can get more money from selling at the farmer's market or something like this. Community-supported agriculture, and this is, I understand the thing, but what I'm looking at is ecological function. And what I notice is that productivity is a derivative of functional systems. So there's primary systems, and there is the production that comes from functionality. And the fact of the matter is the primary systems are more valuable than the products. And when we understand this, we have changed our economy. That's the post paradigm. That's where real money, real value is coming from ecological function. And the people who are doing ecological function are serving not only themselves, but every other living thing on the planet and future generations. And that's way more important than productivity. And what's interesting is this doesn't mean that productivity is not important or that you're going to have less productivity. It means you're going to have more productivity because functional ecosystems are always more productive than degraded ones. So it's just about getting the primacy and the secondary aspect correct.
Can I add a little to that? It's not just productivity, it's also biodiversity. And what I mean by that is that, for many of us, we're promoting the idea of regenerating the landscape, reforesting it using biochar for, well, let's put it this way. A large part of the world that we have altered, we've turned from pristine jungle into land that's been so degraded that only invasive weeds are there. So large areas, people don't know what the original landscape was. All they know are the invasive weeds. If we turn that into biochar, we could be making bioenergy to replace fossil fuels, and we can be putting carbon in the soil, and this is a huge amount of opportunities. Now, there's several ways that could be done. I mean, the way we want to see it, or John and Michael and all of us, would be to have the most biodiverse possible systems, greatest diversity and multiple products and all that. That's not how industrial agriculture works. They want to grow one crop simultaneously, harvest it at one time, and make a whole pile of money. They don't want to be harvesting little bits of this and that to have a balanced system. They want a totally unbalanced system. And just as the notion of making biochar or using biological energy can be put into regeneration, where people are individually regenerating the landscape and making it biodiverse. We have, at the same time, a proposal in front of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that's the worst parody of this that you could imagine. It's called BECCS, Biological Energy with Carbon Capture and Sequestration. Sorry?
Keep your mouth in front of you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so the parody of what we do is something called BECCS, Biological Energy with Carbon Capture and Sequestration. Now, it's being touted as the green solution to climate change, and the sustainable solution, but let me tell you what it is. It's a proposal that is put forward by governments, by the biggest chemical agriculture companies, by the people who are putting out the chemical fertilizers and the pesticides and making billions off that and destroying their planet. And what they have in mind is the following system. They have in mind vast plantations, thousands of miles across, say, in which they grow a single clone of a single species of tree, cut them all down over large areas, burn them in centralized power plants, and then pump the CO2 into a hole in the ground. And they're claiming that is a green and ecological solution to climate change. Now, it's the worst travesty of what we're talking about. It reduces biodiversity, reduces ecosystem function, it destroys the planet, and it centralizes it in the hands of the people who've been making money off the existing fossil fuel system. So it's a way of continuing business as usual and pretending to be green with the same people making the money. Now, what's kind of frightening about that is I've been in eucalyptus plantations in Brazil where they cut down the primary jungle. There's nothing but eucalyptus. In Borneo where they cut down the jungle and they're just planting one species of tree to cut down and turn into plywood. And, in these forests, there are no insects, there are no birds, there are no animals. There's no litter on the ground. They're just sterile. The plants are growing off chemical fertilizer. Soil is just a prop to hold the plant from falling down.
There's a huge...
Can I go and get into something real quick?
Yes, well,
going around and around a little bit.
We can carry on, but you know what? We actually have, the agenda is still going on, and so we're going to take one more. I'm just sorry, there's just this long line, but...
What time is the end?
Okay, well, it was supposed to be at 8:30, and we started a bit late, and so we're going to go a little bit late, but we still are, we do have those two other things on the agenda tonight, which are some major things, which will...
So I was going to
let the gentleman go and let me explain next.
Okay. So just real quick on watch the little birdie. It's over here. I have a 10-year-old, and I've been trying to keep him from... It's a great conversation. And we can engage this conversation, and I'm doing it very well with my 10-year-old who has $10 trillion of technology designed to get his attention away from me. And it's a good conversation. They're willing to have the conversation with the 10-year-olds. They're actually much happier paying attention to this life in front of them if we engage them, but we don't engage them very well. And so I have a beautiful 10-year-old that wants to be engaged, but he needs a village to engage him.
Yes.
And they only pay attention to the phone because they don't have a village. I'm an economics student from the best or worst economics school in the world, depending on how you look at it.
Which one is that?
Well, I went to University of Chicago and studied economics, and they tried to give me golden handcuffs and take me off to be an investment banker. And I said, I want to go build mud huts instead. And so I've been doing that for 20 years, and I've been addicted to ideals for 20 years. And I love my ideals. Don't take them away from me. However, I have 2 children, and I wanted to ask everybody, how many people are in their 30s and 40s? Or 20s? Okay, leave your hands up if you have children.
Oh, dear.
Okay, let's do that again. How many are in their late 20s, 30s, and 40s? Okay. How many of you have children? All right, out of you who have children, how many are still together with your partners? So I'm trying to address the biodiversity question having to do with the human ecosystem as it engages with the biological ecosystem. And I've always asked this question of why is restoration over there? And why is conservation over there? What about here? And I'm a development specialist. I specialize in ecological development, but on the building side rather than the agricultural side. And I've been doing that for 20 years. And the thing about making a living as a father of 2, when I didn't have it given to me, is that I was so far out on a limb of my ideals that the branch broke. And so I had to come back to solid ground, which has a lot of compromise involved. And the thing my mother said as a mystic, her mother escaped Russia in the belly of her mother in the revolution, and she's always been a real mystical person, is the ideal peddling has been going on for thousands of years. And I love ideals, don't get me wrong. But Hansel and Gretel, you know that story? And this is what it looks like, according to my mother. I moved to Olympia 20 years ago. There's all these wonderful permaculture people, natural building people, I love it. But my mother said, well, it's kind of like Hansel and Gretel, the house is coated with sugar and gumdrops and gingerbread, and all the young people go over and they eat the sugar and gumdrops and gingerbread and cookies. And they're lost in the woods, and they're hungry, and they need ideals, and they need sugar. But the witches are there in the house, and they get the energy of the children. And when the youth are lost in the woods, they are the last people that should be volunteering for idealism.
And so I believe in the restoration camp model, but I'm going to not like it if those kids and 20-somethings are volunteering for it. And I've told multiple restoration camp proponents, and I've actually dreamt of a restoration timeshare for 20 years. I've been advocating for microequity through restoration camp type ideas, but I don't talk about it a lot. It's a big idea. But microequity and the economic system is what we have, and until we have something to replace it with, we have to somehow work within it. And actually, generations pass on generational wealth, and it's happening everywhere right now. I manage like 50 off-grid development projects at a time all over the western United States, and I supply materials and designs and But these young people are the last ones to volunteer. Get the retired people to volunteer. Get the retired people to pass on the generational wealth to young people in microequity type forms. And a restoration camp as a timeshare is a great model. And I was talking to Matthew down in Paradise, California, who's doing a camp down there. And I've mentioned that to Paul, who's around Olympia doing. If you give people microequity and they don't focus on 10 restoration camps, they just do one. They're a time shareholder. They go back year after year after year. They get to see it. They have this little piece that they can feel a sense of belonging to. I'm really excited about that. I want to join, but I can't volunteer anymore. I volunteered for 20 years, and I've got 2 children, and I need to figure out how to. So anyway, that's a little bit of my just piece. But thank you for promoting it, and I really appreciate it.
What's your name? What's your name? What? I'd like to.
Joseph.
Joseph, thank you. So, what we're going to do now is, because we've had some time up here with the 3 of us, but what we're talking there is culture repair. There's personal repair, and I addressed that early in the conference when it became clear that it wasn't just about earth repair. Our conference, it was about culture repair and personal repair. So we've worked all of that into this conversation here. And the most important times of the conference is that when a lot of people are talking. And so I want to actually make it a point here now, because there's so many of you out there that could be up here. I mean, we're cool, but we're not exceptional. We're just so many cool people here, and so it should be a point. These people in the aisle, they want to speak. I want to give everybody a chance to speak in the next session. So I'm going to explain just a teeny bit before I introduce Hannah here about our networking session. But we're going to bring everybody together to a place where we can all talk that wish to contribute to a more specific discussion, whether it be economics or culture or trees or water. And so we're going to break into tracks. And how many people here have read some of the things about the tracks before in the conference? They're kind of aware of the fact that we have tracks. Okay, and how many people here are really, it's kind of clue, they're like, what tracks? What are they talking about, railroads? Okay, so there's quite a few of you that don't know. So we're going to have Hannah come up and explain how the tracks thing or the networking thing is going to happen tonight. And I'm hoping it's the most exciting thing of the conference after this. So I hope that many of you will come, because you can say, well, I can go to my room, I can go to my campsite, I can just hang out with my friends. But I'd like us to have some really serious conversations about moving the Global Earth Repair Conference forward, rather than just your personal agenda tonight, but that you stick with it. But there's also a second offering that's really important, because the grief people, and they had a very large group today at the USO Hall. There's a lot of people interested in the grief work, because if you're not grieving, you're not really a human being at this point. And so the grieving, the people that are really focusing on how to let this grief work for us are going to have a special session, and it'd be nice if one of you had a brief moment to discuss that too, because you're going to have a choice now. Go off and do the work on our tracks, and some of you are going to go off and do the grief work. So I'm going to let Hannah come up first and talk about the tracks, and then maybe Lawrence would just say a few words about the grief work tonight.
All right, good evening, everyone. A little bit of pressure here to sell like such a talked up thing, but I'm going to do it because I really want to encourage those of you who want to dive deeper, who want to take advantage of being here in person to really form teams that we can go forth and do this work together. We're going to gather up in the USO building, the registration building there, and people have volunteered to help facilitate. We're also looking for other facilitators to break into the different groups. We will have some lovely signs to signify these, as well as some wild card ones. So if you don't see your main passion there, start a group. And we will then have discussion for an hour and gather emails. And then a very important part of this is to then set a time for an open space gathering at this meeting so that the teams can still continue and network and meet each other. And so inside the hallway by the registration table, there's a whole open space wall. Okay, we're going to get a picture of it in a moment. But anyways, go there, decide when you want to gather, put it up, and so that other people can be part of your team as well to move this forward. And then we will all be inviting you to continue these dialogues on the weavernetwork.org, and we have a table up in the hallway also to share more information about that. But that's where all of these breakout groups will have a place for us to talk online, to strategize, until we can come together in person more. We don't want you spending all your time on the computer, but we do need to organize, and so let's take advantage of these tools. And let's see. Yeah, we're going to be doing a lot, so I know it's late, but still stay energized, and let's come together up there for a little while. And this whole time, be networking. If you see anybody with these orange tags, that's to signify that we're here to help facilitate at any time. And if you need any ideas about how to continue these dialogues, how to take advantage of being here and forming our teams, let's go do it. This is the great work of our time, and we're here as all teammates, so thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And
oh, okay, they really want me to show you the picture of the wall because it's so beautiful, and look at all the open spaces that need to be filled. So, and the tracks. That's the sign-up sheet that then you can leave at the Weaver Network table when you're done. Here's all the different tracks, kind of clustered in themes. And so we'll break up into these groups, start some dialogue, and then continue it online. So since you can only be at one place at a time, you can then meet up with your other fellow people later on with the same passions on Weaver Network. What? This morning's goal. Well, that's what I'm talking about, the open space. Set a time to meet and continue the dialogue, gather each other's emails, go later on to Weaver Network, find that group. The goal is to network and enjoy each other and join around your passions. Learn more how we can all help each other support it in this work. One last thing, since I got the microphone. I was at the first ecosystem restoration camp in the U.S., the first official one last weekend. And I just got to say how amazing it was to see the power of when we all come together and have a good time doing this important work. We did a permaculture blitz at one of the only 2 schools that are back in session up in the burnt down town of Paradise, and it was amazing. And we can all do this together everywhere and just talk about this work with your neighbors and everyone until everybody is doing earth repair. So thank you.
thank you, Hannah Apricot-Eckberg. And so, just a little bit of cueing in, when we are over in the USO Hall, we'll be holding up these signs, and there's quite a few of them, as you saw, and people will just cluster together with those people, and they'll assess, like, oh, well, there's 8 of us, that's a good number, or 5, or they might say, well, gee, there's not too many of us, but why don't we just join, we're this kind of a water session, why don't we just link up with them? So you can sort of modify your initial coming together. So it's going to be interesting to see who, how many people want to gravitate to the different cluster ideas. So that's what we're going to do, and so we'll have to exit and try to get up there relatively soon. I think we'll give it like a 10-minute break, and then we'll begin up there and see what our energy level is. I was going to have Lawrence come up, but Cobra Mansa?
No, I just want to say something like... We are talking about repair, and I think one of the things we need to repair is our words, because that's something what make me very comfortable. There's no third world. There's no third world, no second. We have only one word. And if you keep this, you're not going to change. And you need to change that. I'm from Brazil, and I don't like when people say that's the third world, because we are not. We belong to the same world. And until we don't change this mentality, few things can be done. And the second, if United States don't change your habit, nothing can change, because you as the big consumer, you produce a lot of trash, and everything what you produce there, most is for you guys. And when you talk about some of the things what he was talking, it's like, because the politics is making you produce that. It's not because the farmer wanted to produce. It's because that's the only thing the earth has to produce, okay? And we need to change that. And if you guys from here don't change, nothing's gonna change, because you are responsible for a lot of things what's happening all over the world. And you need to take responsibility for that, okay? Thank you.
So, Lawrence, a few words from you about your offerings. And thank you, Cobra Mansa from Brazil. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I can just say it. I want to go here because this is about values. This is about what we've been talking about. How do we start tuning into what really matters and bringing energy? And I loved what was said about what if we had an economy, what if we had a system of exchange that actually was based on the restoration of all these kinds of things. Every one of these things would be generating a medium of exchange in some way, rather than our medium of exchange is based on murdering the planet. And so anyway, all I'm saying is when we do grief work, we get to experience once again what it's like to be a people and to feel what it's like to hold each other well through the full enlivening power of releasing emotion through our bodies, because we can do it together better than we can alone. And then we start finding that our true wealth is each other rather than commodities or things. And it's basically about reweaving the sense that we belong together. And the primal wound is the break in belonging, and you cannot satiate that longing to belong with belongings. It doesn't work. You only can do it through connecting and holding each other well. And so that's why we do the work. But I have a hard time saying, okay, let's go experience that for an hour and a half. Usually, like somebody was saying, it's like traditionally it's 3 days, or I just did 2 weekends in a row of 4 days. It's like we're talking an hour and a half in the midst of everything else that happens. So I'm having a hard time with it, but you're sure welcome. I'm heading over there. Anybody wants to come and see what it's like for even just a short time. It's up in building 204, and it's going to be upstairs in room 20. And
it's upstairs,
we'll give
right?
a little toe in the water around what it's like to have this experience of holding each other well, staying the course for a bit with each other through being permissionaries for whatever is actually happening in our hearts and in our bodies, so that, you know, and that heals. Healing is about remembering, bringing all the parts back together into a community. So, there we go.
Thank you, Lawrence. And so, let's have a big round before you run out the door to one of the two places. Careful on the run. Let's have a big round of applause for our keynote speakers. Give it up for them. Yeah. Woo! Yeah. Okay, see you all there.